Hi there guys, I'm Nikhil from GreedyTech and this is the camera review of the iQOO Z3. Now these are the camera specifications of this phone. On the rear, this phone has a triple camera setup with a 64 megapixel primary camera with a GW3 sensor, followed by an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle camera with f2.2 aperture, and finally a 2 megapixel camera for taking macro shots. For selfies, we get a 16 megapixel camera with that new eye autofocus technology. Now we'll first start off with the selfies. So these are the sample shots. Color reproduction is good. Skin tones also look pretty good, pretty close to accurate colors. There is some post-processing going on, but still the end results are pretty decent. Dynamic range and exposure control are also nice. Now these are some portrait selfies. Edge detection is pretty good most of the time. Color reproduction is also good and the skin tones also look pretty accurate. Now these are some selfies taken in low lighting conditions. Once again, they look pretty decent. Color reproduction has been pretty well managed. Selfies are slightly on the softer side, but that can't be helped in low lighting conditions. Now these are some selfies taken in low lighting conditions using the night mode. Obviously, pictures taken in this mode look better, colors look good and much more brighter, and the selfies are obviously much more sharper than the regular mode. But you do have to hold the phone pretty steady to get better pictures. Now this is the sample footage from the front facing camera. Footage is pretty stable, color reproduction is also pretty good, and the footage has pretty good sharpness. Exposure control and dynamic range are very well managed, but sometimes the sky is overexposed. But considering the price, I'd say this phone is doing a pretty decent job. Now these are some sample pictures taken with the rear camera. Exposure control is pretty good, colors are slightly on the saturated side, but images do look pleasing. Dynamic range is also pretty good. Color temperature is slightly to the cooler side, but whether it's good or bad depends upon personal preference. Now these are some wide angle shots which are followed by the regular shots. Exposure control and dynamic range are pretty good, colors are close to reality, and the color temperature is once again on the cooler side. There is a slight difference between exposure control and color reproduction between the primary camera and the wide angle camera. This is a difference that we can see on most phones in this price segment. It's not a bad thing, but it's not a good thing either. Now these are some macro shots. Color reproduction is good and they have pretty good sharpness. Now these are some portrait shots taken with the rear camera. Edge detection is pretty good. It is slightly off in some photos, but for most of the portrait shots, it does a pretty good job. Color reproduction is good, but once again slightly on the saturated side. Dynamic range and exposure control are once again pretty well managed. By the way, this phone also has a dedicated 64MP mode where we can actually take a 64 megapixel picture. Normally when you take a picture on this phone, you actually get a compressed image. So for some reason, if you want to take a bigger 64 megapixel picture, then you can use this mode. Most of the time you won't find any difference between the regular picture and the 64MP picture, but obviously you'll get more details in the 64MP mode. Now these are some pictures taken in low lighting conditions. Once again, this phone does a pretty decent job in terms of color reproduction and reducing the background noise. Now these are some pictures taken in complete darkness with flash. Once again, they do look pretty good. Colors are not too accurate, but they do get the job done. Now these are some pictures taken with the wide angle camera in low lighting conditions. In these pictures, color temperature is on the warmer side. Next, this phone also has a night mode for the rear cameras. So these are the pictures. Overall, images taken with the night mode are obviously much more brighter, and the color reproduction is also slightly better than the regular pictures. Now these are some pictures taken in indoor lighting conditions with the night mode. Once again, pictures taken with night mode look brighter and look better. We also have few filters which we can use in night mode, and these are the sample shots, and they all look pretty good. Now as for video recording, this is a sample footage recorded in 1080p resolution at 30 fps. We have electronic image stabilization and the stabilization is pretty good. Exposure control and dynamic range are great, color reproduction is good, and you get pretty accurate colors. Now this is the sample footage recorded with a wide-angle camera. We also have electronic image stabilization, but the footage is slightly shaky. Dynamic range is pretty good. We also have the super stable mode on this phone, which can further stabilize the footage. And this is the sample footage. Footage is pretty stable, but colors are slightly on the duller side. We also have the option to record 4K video on this phone, and this is the sample footage. Surprisingly, it also offers electronic image stabilization, and the footage is pretty stable. Exposure control and dynamic range are nice, and the color reproduction is also pretty good. By the way, this is a 4K footage downscaled to 1080p. We also have slow motion video recording on this phone, and this is a sample footage recorded at 720p at 240 fps. We can also record slow-mo at 1080p at 120 fps. This is the sample footage. So guys, to conclude, cameras on this phone are definitely pretty good and they are definitely worth the price, especially its primary cameras. So guys, what do you think about the camera performance of this phone? Do let me know by commenting below this video, and if you're planning to buy this phone, use the link in the description. It always helps the channel. With that said, this is Nikhil signing off. See you in my next video.